Hello, Mari. How are
Hello, Berwyn. It's very nice to see you in this state for a change. I was really interested because WERC, the Work-Based Education Research Centre, came to VU, and I was a bit surprised, I have to say, that it came here. So can you say a bit about why it came here and what its sort of scope and mission was about?
Why it came here is because of the senior management within Victoria University in, I think, earliest 2007, Anne Jones, and the then head of research, Linda Rossman, and Richard Carter, who was the head of TAFE, and others, I think, felt it was a good opportunity to develop a centre which had a focus within the university on vocational education, particularly given the fact that it is a dual sector or multi-sector organisation. Seemed to make sense. I was already running a centre at the Canberra Institute of Technology and had been doing so for just over 10 years. And I think when Anne went searching for someone to head up this new centre, which had a terrible acronym, which I've promptly forgotten, the people who were in charge of seeking to find someone to head the centre up decided they'd talk to me about who might be a possible director. A good deal of people, I think, were approached and knocked it back. They were mainly higher ed people, I think. Anne, would that be so?
Not entirely. Another one of them is from that background has been subsequently snaffled by VU.
Oh yes, of course. After a while, I got sick of being asked by the headhunter whom they might go to next, and I said in a foolish moment, "It's interesting you haven't asked me whether I would be interested." And there was silence on the end of the telephone, and then she said, "I'll ring you back." And the next person who rang me was Anne Jones. No, it was Susan Young, I think, and then Anne Jones. So rather than seeking someone from elsewhere, they got me at the right time. I think I was interested to do something new. So that's why I'm here. Now, why the centre, I think, was the question, wasn't it? So I better get to the point.
Mm-hmm.
I think the fact that it was a dual sector organisation made it really a fertile ground for vet research and the research that can be undertaken between the boundaries between vocational education and higher education. But so that you're quite clear about what we were set up for, I thought I would just read to you exactly what it said in the concept brief. The Centre for Vocational Work-Based Education will capitalise upon VU's status as dual sector university to establish VU as a leading centre for research and innovation in vocational education and work-based education. The centre will conduct research that informs the practice of vocational education and work-based education at VU and more generally. It will provide opportunities for staff, including VE staff, to develop skills in research into vocational education and work-based education. It will attract students, including education students and postgraduate coursework, into vocational education, work-based education. It will build the university's reputation by publishing and otherwise contributing to scholarship. It will lead the development of an international perspective on vocational work-based education at VU by developing links with a network of international partners. It will attract external funding to support its research on vocational education and work-based education, and it will use existing funding to provide valuation of and inform the delivery of VET in the university. So that basically was the intent, the objectives of the centre.
Now, as we go through, you might want to make some...
Reflect back on those.
Yes. And the extent to which they're been met.
I will, yes.
But in its 6 years that it's been operating, the Work-Based Research Education Research Centre researchers, and there haven't been it's not a huge
No.
operation, is it?
No. At most, I think it was 6.
At the most.
At the most, it was 6.
And not all full time.
No, not all full time.
No.
I think we made ourselves a little bigger by connecting with outsiders, with kindred interests, which gave us the opportunity to develop project teams for specific projects. That was the only way I think we could have operated. Without partners, we would have been really struggling to do anything but small projects, I believe.
But you, the last few years, you've won 6 Category 1 research grants, largely through that very highly competitive National Vet Research Program, and numerous other grants from governments and agencies. Can you give us, how much did you actually bring in, Berwyn?
Well, for the purposes of this discussion, I actually did some homework and added up some numbers. And from the Category 1, which is Commonwealth funded through the National Vet Research and Evaluation Program, managed by NCVR, we were awarded $751,000 worth of research. And when the majority of these projects were something between 45 to about 75,000, that's a fair effort, I think. Other research and consultancies, and because of the diverse nature of the work that we did, and it was around work-based learning models, about innovation in trade teaching, it was about pedagogical approaches, it was about diverse learners and organisational learning and development, as well as assessment and evaluation. And through the auspices of Mark O'Rourke and Stefan Schutt, technology-enabled learning, the consultancies amounted to about $1.923 million. So in total, in the 6 years, we managed to bring in about just over $2.5 million worth of funding.
Which is pretty impressive for anybody outside medical research and, big infrastructure, competitive research of any kind. I mean, and yet you seem to hide your little lights under a bushel there, internally, whereas externally you'd probably be one of the biggest faces of VU and research.
Well, we're not one of the biggest, but I think we were punching well above our weight. And in recent years, vet research centres have been much reduced, and there are only about 2 or 3 of them left, and they are mainly just small groups of people. There's not a distinct vet research centre in a university anymore, sadly. So in that sense, we were unique, as the one at Canberra Institute of Technology was. But I think the breadth of work that we did meant that we weren't actually building a body of knowledge in one particular field other than assessment, where Shelley Gillis, we must give due reward to Shelley, because she is an international expert in the area of assessment and evaluation. And I think it's sad that she's departed without doing something like this. But I think nearly $2.75 million in a very narrow field is I think it's terrific. I'm very proud of that, I must say.
I think you should be. Can you just give us a bit of a scope of some of the actual projects?
Okay, well, perhaps first I better say where the funding came from.
Oh, yes.
A good deal of it came from Commonwealth, who commissioned research for specific purposes around the development of assessment policy, around the development of organisational capability. We did work for the Productivity Commission, we did work for the National Quality Council, we did work for the National Skills Standards Council, and then we did work for state and territory governments and industry, which I think is an area that perhaps with a little more effort and better connections, we could have captured more work there. but two significant projects for BHP Billet 9, or who don't just give their money to anybody. Mind you, they've got lots of money and they give you a lot if they like you, but that was mainly gained on the reputation of our little centre and the work that we'd previously done. I think with regard to projects, and I'm sorry I have to refer to papers again, I selected a few because I was thinking you really want to hear about impact outcomes of that research. I mean, it's all very well to do research, but if it is locked away in a cupboard or in some instances used to keep doors open, there is limited value. But the one thing about vet research is that it is always about application. It's always about being useful and applied to both policy formulation and to practice. It's not in its nature whimsical. In fact, if it was whimsical, you'd never get funded. Vet research tends to be aligned to established research goals, which are set by NCVR through the Commonwealth and State and Territory Ministers of Education and Training, and now industry. So in that sense, they're very much dictated. So to capture some of this money and to do this work, you need to understand how the politics of vet research works, and also about what will be catchy for the organisations, training providers, students and others. So it needs to be carefully honed and directed to a purpose within the sector. As a consequence, you have to be pretty sharp about what's going to win. And NCVR funding is tight. At a maximum, you'll get 100,000. At a maximum, they will fund 5 projects per year. And to capture the panel's thinking, you need to be aware of what is going to be saleable. So coming back to the projects that we've done, probably the one that has had the most significant impact and which has, to be blunt, caused the biggest stink.
Oh, good.
Is practitioner expectations and experiences with the Certificate for in Training and Assessment, which is the benchmark qualification for teachers teaching in vocational education and training.
Yeah, do you want to say a little bit about this kind of about the project as well, but then about the stinks?
The project talked to, we always do qualitative research, or mixed methods, I must admit. In that project, we talked to people who had recently gone through this benchmark qualification, a Certificate for. And for those in the audience who understand what that actually means, there's a low-level qualification which is seen to be appropriate for those entering into vocational education and training teaching. It has always been problematic. And whilst there'd been a good deal of evidence gathered to say that it is problematic and it doesn't actually prepare people well enough to enter into vocational education teaching, we figured that we need to explore what new people into the field actually experience and what they gain from that qualification. So we did a study which asked them to talk about how well they felt they were prepared, how well the program covered the extent of material that they needed to take on into their teaching practice, what their experiences were with the delivery of it, their views on the quality of the assessment they undertook and their own understanding of how assessment is undertaken. We asked them early, 6 weeks after they'd completed their qualification. We then went back to them 9 months later and said, okay, reflecting on what you said previously and your experience with the qualification, doing the qualification, how well did it prepare you? And unsurprisingly, in hindsight, they were able to say, well, we thought it did. And they actually said we were very highly satisfied first up 6 weeks after finishing. But 9 months down the track, when they'd actually tried to use what they had learned in their own teaching and learning experiences, they found a whole series of gaps. And when I wrote that up, I was very conscious that the world was watching me. And because people were concerned that there was more evidence about how well it actually suited the purpose that it was intended for. I was very conscious of the politics, so I thought, oh, what the hell. One line I wrote, which has lived with me and will live with me forever and ever, and it's the most commonly cited line, and I indicated that this qualification, when well taught, does provide a foundation for initial teaching practice. And that, when well taught, has been put back to me on a number of occasions, because unfortunately when I should have said it's lousy, it won't do the job, I said when well taught, and they're the sorts of things that policymakers pick up on. But they said, well, okay, you've said it's well taught, and we're happy for that to stay the benchmark. And I thought I really missed an opportunity there. If I had reworded that sentence, I don't know how you do these things, but that's research. That's the politics of research. Now, it's been used, that sentence has been used in the Productivity Commission report on the vet workforce by the AU, who were appalled, the union, who were appalled that I would even suggest that the Certificate 4 was an appropriate qualification. By policymakers who say, well, we don't need to change anything. So you never actually realise what impact a piece of research might have until you see something like that.
And the
realise
dead wombat in the room.
Yeah, and thinking myself, I had an opportunity, I missed it. But then what I did do is generate a massive debate. And in that debate, perhaps some headway was made in the content of the qualification, but it's still a problem because it can be delivered in 4 days. And the quality is somewhat suspect under those circumstances.
Especially in small organisations without much experience or
Well,
background.
I think the thing that horrified me when I spoke to some of these people who had undertaken this qualification is that they didn't even have a training environment in which to practice. So they were actually sitting through, with a group such as this we have in front of us here, as a group, learning and being assessed to and getting the Certificate 4 and using the group in front of them as the practice team when there's no real training environment. So how might they tackle something when they get out into a registered training organisation? It's a significant issue.
Yes. I mean, I remember the debate quite strongly, in higher ed circles as well as in vet circles, because, a number of the then existing bachelor's degrees, for example, at the University of South Australia, people did the Cert 4 as part of their degree. And there were huge issues of how can you think that that's going to, this certificate is going to actually prepare you for a career in, not that any pre-existing preparation is ever going to be enough, but to get to the starting point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think the universities that are teaching a bachelor program with the embedded Certificate 4 are very conscious of building the expertise. I mean, I think that's one way to go. But whilst policymakers believe that a Certificate 4 is sufficient, those who are delivering the bachelor programs are struggling to maintain numbers, and they are reducing at a rapid rate, unfortunately.
Yes, not only because of the qualifications, but partly because of the destruction of technical and further and vocational education.
Exactly.
Which we'll come back to a bit later. What about that terrific project enhancing retention of young people to Year 12, especially through vocational skills? What about that one?
That was a project which was also funded by the Commonwealth, but through the Australian College of Educators and TAFE Directors Australia. There had been a forum in Hobart discussing how vocational education and training could be utilised to encourage more young people who were disengaged with school to perhaps hang on a little bit longer and get something that was a decent qualification plus some skills that they could move on either into further education or into work or apprenticeships. And it was an interesting project because what we were asked to do, and Jerry, who worked on that project, is in the audience as well, so Jerry, pipe up at any stage. The intent was to try and identify good practice in the various sorts of programs that were put together, vocationally based programs that were deliberately designed to encourage young people who were disadvantaged, disengaged and disinterested in education generally. So what we did was actually asked communities to identify programs they thought were effective in this area, and I think we ended up with about 37 in the list right across Australia, and we brought it down to I think about 9 in the end, and we did case studies of those 9, and they were markedly different. There were really disadvantaged students, a little place in Adelaide who dealt with really disadvantaged students. Just keeping them coming to classes was a significant thing. If they managed to get a full set in the class, they felt they'd achieved something. Right through to some very well designed Indigenous programs which were delivered in Indigenous communities, where TAFE organisations went into the Indigenous communities and provided vocational education training programs, not only for the youngsters but also for their grandmothers and anyone else who happened to be around, so that there was this community engagement with these programs, the intent being to support the young people to go right through and complete. One of the key products from that project was an evaluative framework which was designed to be used by other similar programs to evaluate their own performance against. And that framework was picked up within VU and used in the youth programs here. And it's been picked up, as far as I know, in about 6 or 7 other large systems that have been using it. The Catholic education system in New South Wales, for example, has utilised it, and TAFE Queensland uses it for those sorts of programs. So it's a simple framework which says, well, if you're looking for good outcomes from these programs, this is a set of things that you might consider, and you might gather data against those things to give you a sense of success in programs.
I mean, it'd be really interesting to replicate that at the minute, given the whole pressure on learning and earning. You've got to stay at school till you're 17, changes in federal government requirements about how you can get an allowance or not, and also the issue of what does it mean to stay at school or not. What does it mean to retain young people? Does it mean some kind of a streaming is a good idea? Does it mean we should be going for equal but different?
I mean, I think the critical thing in that framework was strategies for engagement. And given young people are required to stay at school till 17, if you're disinterested when you're 13 or 14, it's an extensive period of time, so I think it's a critical issue. I'm not sure about the government's views on earning and learning, but we felt that the framework was an effective strategy, and certainly when we fed it back to those who'd engaged in the research itself, they were delighted with the fact that they had something to measure their own performance. And yet what we did was capture the best components of this full range of programs and just chunked it up into a framework for evaluating success.
I mean, it'd be very interesting, I reckon, to do it again. I mean, I think in the current context, there's a lot of pressure which is, I think, significantly devaluing good educational and vocational education purposes in the range of programs that are being offered, and the return to some kind of education is largely for the elite. And that's where most of the resources are going, and yet the young people who are disengaged are also having to be there. So it's a really difficult time.
I think when the pressure will come on governments when unemployment rises with young people, and something will have to be done to address it. Hopefully we don't get to the old days of labour market programs where we churn people through them one after the other with no actual occupational outcome at the end. But good, strong vocational education programs with associated language literacy and numeracy or whatever is needed. These programs were evidence of success.
And we probably, it'd be a great thing to actually look at those and think about our current programs both here at VU.
Well, I think that evaluative framework, and I'd be interested to hear what people say later on. I think that still has great merit.
Yeah, well, let's hope that some of the people might take that up, for example, as a challenge in, say, a master's unit or a master's project or program, that they might do a minor thesis and actually do something using it. I think that'd be a great legacy to have, keeping us here at VU. Any other projects you'd like to? Because I do think that the idea that vet research, it's such a precious commodity because there's so little of it, and in one sense, partly as a result of that, and also because government tends to be so heavily involved in both providing the funds and in
receiving the outcomes,
getting the outcomes. You've had to be pretty instrumental in your focus, and be very quick on your feet politically, as you were referring to before. So, I think it is really important to do some analysis of the kinds of projects that you've done, and to be able to say a bit about, you create some debates in the field. Are there any ones that you'd say have changed policy?
Absolutely. One critical area, I think, is work that we did on assessment, validation and moderation, and which was done for the National Quality Council. It demanded of us a pretty significant piece of research up front, and then to develop some guidance and instruments later on. Validation of assessment was not previously done in vocational education generally. Good teachers did it automatically, but it wasn't systematically in place. There are huge issues around the quality of assessment in vocational education and training. Competency-based training, competency-based assessment, despite the rhetoric, are not easy. It's been treated as a simple process of monkey see, monkey do, tick it off. Neither of those things are actually applicable. To determine competency or capable people, you actually need to have a thorough understanding of what competent performance looks like. And whilst assessment is always sampling, there's some pretty shonky assessment going on out there. And of course, the quality of assessment has an impact on the quality of the qualifications and the credibility of the outcomes of the vocational education and process. So therefore, we have industry complaining that we're not producing people who are competent. I don't think they know actually what is competent. What they actually mean is you're not producing people who can immediately hit the ground running in my business right here, right now, which, if you think about it, is a pretty unfair sort of assessment of what's possible. But the National Quality Council had got sufficient evidence from another research project to indicate that industry was very unhappy with the quality of assessment, and it was bringing into question the credibility of qualifications in the sector. We were asked, Shelley and I were asked to examine ways of implementing validation and to actually look at the state of play in validation. That is verifying that the assessment process were valid, fair, reliable, etc. From that research project, it went straight to the National Quality Council and never appeared again into the bowels of the department. But what we then were charged to do was to develop a code of practice and also to develop a guide to developing assessment tools which would help people through the processes. That is now in place in the system and has been taken on board in the latest standards for registered training organisations. So that has had a pretty significant impact. It is instrumental, you're quite right, but if it is undertaken properly, it should have a considerable impact on the quality of assessment and the quality of the outcomes. But of course it's very much dependent on the capability of the people who are going through the processes. So again, we come back to the lack of capability, the lack of expertise in assessment, and for that matter, the lack of expertise in teaching.
Which takes us back to the
where we were
search
before.
for, yes.
Yes.
Now, I think we have to move on a bit, but I'm really, I'm actually terrified by the undoing of National Vet and the whole, the threat to the whole sector that is occurring, I think, in changes in policy, changes in funding. And Australian vocational education and training has had a pretty reasonable reputation internationally on a range of its features. So, I mean, if vocational education and training is under threat, and so is vet research, which is already, as I said before, a very precious commodity, affected by things like greying of our researchers and they're leaving research, and also lack of institutional support and lack of significant funding opportunities. I think I'd like to ask you, because you've been so well networked in the sector, what you see as the current state of play and what we might be needing to be worried about.
Well, first of all, I probably need to say I could be worried about what I'm going to say because I don't know where it's going to go after this. I suppose I'm in a position now to probably say what I like, hopefully. I was previously in a position where I could influence policy, and I am no longer there, I do not think. So my concern about the current approach is that TAFE itself is in deep distress in every state and territory. The public provider is the backbone of the vocational education and training system. That does not mean that private provision of training is a negative. I'm not saying that at all. There are some really excellent private providers out there, many of whom are running businesses, and that has forced TAFE to also run a business. Often, I think, neglecting the E in TAFE, the education, and probably the F as well, the further education has gone as well. Now, under those circumstances, if business holds sway, concepts of education and educational research and institutional research will always struggle. I think the government is mainly concerned to cut red tape. That's a good excuse for cutting funding, cutting anything that's currently existing. I believe the Commonwealth Government will, in the end, after the release of the Federation White Paper, will give the majority of that back to the states and territories. And I think under those circumstances that the national vet system, which is much admired by people within Australia and also beyond, is definitely under threat. What worries me immensely is that we've sold this via AusAid to the Middle East, to India, to Southeast Asian countries, and to small developing countries in the Pacific as the way forward for vocational education and training. They have our qualification frameworks, they have our quality assurance frameworks, they have our competency standards, or models of, and here we are getting up and walking away from it. Now the role for research in this would, of course, it would seem if you're going to develop new policy that you would be making policy decisions on the basis of an evidence base. That is not occurring. The National Centre for Vocational Education Research, I believe, is maintaining its funding, but the focus is now on data and not on commissioned research. We have yet to see where that national funding will go. And research is being undertaken within the Department of Industry, not by consultants or any other research centres. So it's drawn, all of the information is being developed centrally within the Commonwealth. States and territories put very little into research. So things aren't looking that good. So there is a role for universities here, but
most of them are closing up shop on.
They're closing up shop. But I must admit, I was in Rockhampton the last 2 days at Central Queensland University, which is for the newest dual sector. And why I was up there was to talk about how they would establish research and research strategies and scholarship for their vet people. And I think they're looking at ways of doing that because they perceive that will give them an advantage. And I was thinking to myself, oh dear, can I come and work for you? Because, I mean, it's a fresh look. They see it as a fresh opportunity. They've only been together since the 1st of July. But unless that sort of thing grows from the ground up, I can't see it. They're not going to be brave like they were at VU in 2008 to bring me down here and to bring Shelley and to pull the little team together and to start a centre which was, in essence, very unique. And I think with the potential to do God only knows what.
Plenty more still on. Do you want to say a few things about what you think some of the big issues that might need to be looked at?
The biggest issue is workforce capability. The teaching workforce for vocational education and training has been so neglected that I think we can no longer neglect it. I think organisational change is another critical issue because the vocational education and training has never stood still. I know education never stands still, but vocational education, it's like we put everything in a mix master and blend it every couple of years. We never bed down any change. We have a bright idea, the next person comes in and says, I think we'll do it this way. And despite older people like me saying that dreadful word, excuse me, we've tried that, they plough on regardless. Now, the majority of vet practitioners are dedicated to their learners. It doesn't matter, even if they don't have all the skills in the world, they are dedicated to their learners. They've got to the stage now, I think they just duck their heads down and say, well, let the change roll over. I'll pop up again and nothing really will have changed in my life. And I think unless we address how organisations manage that process, and this is an issue for this organisation, how they prepare people so they can move on into this, what is this new environment of teaching and learning in vocational education and training.
Okay, that's a couple of good ones, a few hints there for people to do a bit of research, yes. But getting back to thinking about your own time here and reflecting back on the things that you think you've achieved, perhaps reflecting back on those, the mission statement,
Yes.
the centre will do all of these things. Not just, but, that's just looking back here at VU, and then maybe we can get on to thinking about looking back over some of the other time here.
Okay, well, when we first started, our major focus was on connecting research with practice and our research with practitioners. And from 2008 through to about 2011, I think we worked very hard at that, and that was fulfilling for us because it makes sense. If you're going to do this research, you've got to do something with it. You just don't print a report and put it on your bookcase. You take it out, you help people work through the findings, you translate where necessary, and you work with them side by side, exchanging what you know about this and sharing what they know, because after all, they're the ones that need to be using it, or may use it, or may simply say, no, you've got it wrong, which has happened a few times. We lost that element in some respects when the funding dried up. I mean, that sort of work of practice connections and research connections was funded by the faculties within this university. And they saw us as an opportunity to generate change, to support people while they built their expertise. And we had quite a number of small projects that were funded by the university and by the faculties, who generously funded us as well, I must admit. There we could see where research was making a difference. We could actually work with people and build expertise, share knowledge, bring in information from outside, research from outside, bring researchers in from outside to share the knowledge that they had. I mean, we had communities of practice. We had visiting academics who came and talked about issues in vocational education. Then I think there was a shift in thinking in the university, and it certainly wasn't on my part or the DVC academic and students, that we had to chase the money because money became a significant issue. And we were very conscious that we needed to be seeking research, although we very rarely put in proposals. It was only NCVR proposals we put in. The rest of the time, money came to us. But it was quite captivating to chase money. And when you know you've got to pay people and they actually expect to eat.
Pay the rent.
And do other things like that. So in a sense, that was a shift I was sad about, that we had kind of, in some senses, we were so busy doing the research that we could not do anything with the outcomes of that research, or not to the extent we originally started off. That's where, with probably a little bit more support from the university, we could have continued that, helping with the continuous improvement, working with people around their capability, looking closely at which we did. With Susan was interested in retention, still is, everyone's interested in retention. We did a little bit of work, but there was so much more work we could have done.
And what about in the higher ed sector?
Well, the higher ed sector, you know, for a dual sector organisation, the higher ed sector, there is a bridge too far sometimes. And I don't like saying that, but it was a challenge. We felt we had things to offer, but sometimes people saw it differently. I mean, there were opportunities where we could have joined together for research, and I think it only occurred in one instance, and that's when Robin Broadbent worked with us on looking at the VCAL, the outcomes of VCAL. There were many more opportunities I think we could have taken. I think the other thing was it was a bit of a battleground with regard to the teaching of the MEd and the development of the MEd. Shelley was fine because she could capture.
She could pass on both sides.
She could pass on both sides. I couldn't, sadly, and I think
ludicrous.
Well, it may be. Looking back, it's probably ludicrous, but it's quite sad that I actually turned people away from doing a PhD or a doctorate with us because I didn't have the qualifications required to supervise. And I think about 15 or 20 people over the 6 years came and said, I really want to do higher quals with you. The success was that the Masters in vet did get up, and we've had a number of people go through, and I would suggest they're better for it. And certainly I think they enjoyed it.
Yeah.
There was plenty of evidence of that. And they were mainly our own staff, and that was good for them. But we did have some outsiders, and I think if we'd been brave and put some money into that, I think we could have pushed that, particularly if some of it had gone online.
Yes. If things had gone, if we could take certain aspects of the MEd vet and put it online, I think we'd have a nationally attractive qualification. But it'd be a bit hard without you.
Oh, no, I think there are others who can do it, and I think that there are ways of doing it. You bring experts in, you don't necessarily have to do it all yourself. I think that's another
And
aspect
maybe
of-
we could cooperate with other
Yeah.
universities to offer something jointly
Yes,
across
I'm sure.
several universities. I think there'd be some interest, but as you say, each of those little areas where there's both research and teaching are smaller
reducing.
and smaller, and so there's fewer and fewer institutions where you could do it. But I think there'd be some opportunity there.
but more importantly, I think less and less organisations, training organisations, are willing to support higher degree quals for their staff, because simply of the cost. When there's limited money available for the day-to-day running of programs, it really is up to individuals putting their hand up, and less that is occurring, I think, and that's the impact is having on the bachelor programs, is that people can't find space or time to do them.
Yes. So, in bringing this to a close, do you want to say any other reflective words about both your extensive career in vocational education, training and research, or about work?
I've done a few of these already now. I feel like Nellie Melba. I'm trying to retire, but it's getting harder and harder. And besides that, I said on the weekend, I don't have enough vases for all the flowers.
Good idea for a gift. Yes.
Reflection. I'm glad I came. I think I must admit, when I said to Anne and Susan, yes, I'm interested, and the next thing I was on an aeroplane sitting in an office with Kath Curry and others, selecting a PA who is in this room at the moment, and I wasn't even employed when that occurred. I thought that was pretty rapid fire, and I thought to myself, what am I doing? I'm leaving home at the age of 65. Is this something I should be doing? But I'm glad I came. It was tough early. I found the culture of the organisation absolutely strange. I couldn't work out who was who or how anything was done, although people told me quite regularly how it was not to be done. I said I would only come for 2 years. I've been here 6.5 years, so that probably says something, either that I'm too lazy to pack up and go home again, or that I have enjoyed myself. I've had a great work team. The people who have been in that team were committed to the cause, and they were brilliant. They were happy to do whatever they were asked. They went over the top in many instances, as I grumbled about you not leaving at 10 o'clock because we still haven't written this report. I don't care if it's 10 p.m. I'm pleased. I think I'm also pleased that I've managed to actually do what these objectives set out to do. We did conduct research that's informed practice. We did provide staff with opportunities to engage in and with research. We attracted, well, I didn't, but certainly Shelley attracted students. I think we certainly have built the university's reputation, because we do have a national and international reputation. And that's no mean feat in 6 years.
No.
I think we've done our fair share of attracting external funding and shown that it is possible. I would love to see this university in the near future having another try at this, and because there certainly is a need for it.
There certainly is, but you leave large boots to be filled.
Ah,
So thank you very much.
it's a pleasure.
We hope that the next phase of your life will be equally challenging, and and that you don't think badly of us when you go back to Canberra.
No, I won't think badly of you, and I would expect people to stay in contact with me because we will still be doing research for the university. In fact, we have a large project going on right now.
Okay, well, with that little forward-looking thing, thank you very much for your time, Berwyn, and over to you.
Thank you.